Good evening. I'm going to wait for a couple of seconds before I get going. A little color in my face. I caught sunburn um, this weekend and didn't realize how long I was outside the sun for a while. How's everybody doing? It's going to be a very structured discussion tonight about the history of the CIA's involvement with Osama bin Laden. And there seems to be a misconception, which is understandable, about just how much they knew about this man. And it's unfortunate because you're if you're the average viewer, the average purveyor, or student of this affair regarding Bin Laden or 9/11 or areas relating to it, you're met with a lot of general information um, from like History Channel, Discovery, very generalized information. And at the other end, this is mostly on viral media, disinformation. And this is coming from, of course, people involved with areas such as 9/11, where people make all types of these very egregious and irrational claims about the man and about anything affiliated with him, even if it's from the CIA or the Foreign Intelligence Services. Some of those misconceptions are, well, Bin Laden was actually Tim Osman, and he was a CIA asset, or that Bin Laden really didn't exist, or that Bin Laden died in the remote area of southern Afghanistan in 2001. And all these theories are based on nothing more than wishful tales of others, are all false. And tonight, hopefully, what I'm going to elucidate for you to the best I can is going to come from reputable source material in which, as always, I will always provide to you in the description, the bottom of the description. Now, we can't know the truth. We can't know everything about the truth, but we can know bits and pieces. And like I always used to say, that we don't need to have the whole puzzle piece put together to know the picture. We just have to have the right pieces fit in the right areas, and we can gauge what the picture looks like. It's wishful thinking to think that we're always going to have the truth at our disposal. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case. Um, but tonight, we're going to be talking about the history of the Central Intelligence Agency and their operational war, so to speak, with Osama bin Laden that goes back to the early 90s. And where I'll start is basically with George Tenet. When in July 11, 1997, George Tenet was sworn in by the Senate Select Committee as the new DCI of the Central Intelligence Agency. Tenet was a Harvard graduate, Georgetown graduate, and he was seen as a true bureaucrat, true visionary, wanted to take the CIA out of the shadows. And if you're old enough to remember the Church Committee hearings led by Senator Frank Church in 1975, where they investigated the Central Intelligence Agency regarding dark operations, assassination plots, and basically put the proverbial handcuffs on the agency from conducting in these illegal operations. Um, and so Tenet basically wanted to reinvigorate the agency himself. So when he came into as the DCI, the president of the United States was Bill Clinton, who was seen very liberal at the time. Um, Bill Clinton was quite wary of Tenet. He was close to Richard Clarke, who is the head official of the U.S. National Security Council, and he was the go-to guy regarding um, anything involving the Middle East, anything involving radical fundamentalism. So Tenet would have to prove himself, and prove himself quick he did. And one of the first things he did was he began to transform the CIA into a global interagency force where human intelligence would come from secretly placed spies in the Arab world. During the 90s, we went from Central America, which is where the CIA concentrated on, to the Middle East in the 1990s. And what Tenet wanted to do was basically reformat the Counterterrorism Center. And in that, he implemented Cofer Black to head the center. And the CIA basically functions like this. They have a base station in every single capital and city all around the world. There is not a place on the face of the earth, anywhere in the world, when it's a capital or a city, a major city, that the CIA doesn't have a base station on. So they're quite expansive. And they would have two primary divisions the CIA has: information acquirers and information processors. And both of these divisions in the CIA have their very own way of collecting and ascertaining information and how it would be disseminated to their superiors or to the Directorate of Operations. Now, their superiors at these base stations are called chiefs, station chiefs. CIA personnel are not called agents like the FBI. They're called case officers. Now, it all depends on how many case officers there are in these cities. Of course, the bigger the city, the bigger the capital, the bigger amount of personnel that work in the space station. And the CIA case officers recruited and ran assets. And they are basically spies and informants. Now, station chiefs collected information that was collected by the case officers who collect their information from informants and spies. And that information is then passed on to the operations division of headquarters, and which is also known as the Directorate of Operations for the CIA. Tenet basically saw fit to reformat the agency and to pitch an idea to the Clinton White House. And during this time, one name kept popping up to the CIA. He was known to the CIA even before Tenet was director. And it was a Saudi financier by the name of Osama Bin Laden, who at this time was he just arrived in Afghanistan. But before Tenet became directorate, Bin Laden had been living in the Sudan, in which the CIA had been running operations on Bin Laden. And I would submit to you that they were running operations on Bin Laden even during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan throughout the mid-1980s. In 1995, David Cohn, who was the head of the CIA's Director of Operations, and George Tenet, who is working as an operational level under the directorate, began implementing the idea of constructing a virtual station which would to task and to monitor the finances and the operational structure of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. And this was actually going to be a very big operation, covert operation. The unit would fuse intelligence disciplines into one office, in which they would have the FBI working there, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, the NSA, in a form of operations analysis, signals intercepts, and overhead photography. And what they wanted was to basically use the base stations in the Middle East and to use case officers and spies to collect information any way possible regarding bin Laden and Al Qaeda all around the world. And so in January of 1996, the plan was approved, and the base station was named the Bin Laden Issue Station. It was codenamed Alex Station. The choice to appoint the station chief of the Bin Laden Issue Station was Michael Scheuer. Michael Scheuer was a very rugged but an experienced case officer who could even speak Farsi and was by far the most qualified in regards to understanding the organizational structure of Al Qaeda, because he was the most experienced when it came to radical fundamentalism. In the same way that the FBI looked at John O'Neill in regards to counterterrorism. Michael Scheuer's first two hires were Alfreda M. Bukowski and Tom Wilshire. Alfreda M. Bukowski would act as a close liaison to Scheuer, and Tom Wilshire became the deputy chief of the Bin Laden Issue Station. That's the number 2 man. And Wilshire also had a background at the FBI headquarters on Hezbollah investigations prior to this employment, which helped him get to the deputy chief. Bukowski was tasked to manage all hires at the center. Bukowski, who's a woman, was given this rare opportunity because women were not seen as equals to men when it came to the intelligence services. And here she was given a very, very important and influential position within this very secluded and insular group that was tasked to run probably the most important operation in the world at the time. So she became unwavering and unfervently loyal to Scheuer. And whoever she hired, she would hire people that would show that same amount of dedication and loyalty to herself and to Scheuer. Meanwhile, while this was going on, Bin Laden was living in Khartoum. And the State Department under Clinton administration began to pressure Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir and their National Front leader and head of all religious entities within the country, Hassan al-Turabi, who is seen as one of the most influential Arabic figures in Africa, who actually invited bin Laden to come into the country when he was under house arrest in Saudi Arabia in 1992. The Sudanese officials began contacting the Saudi Ministry of Affairs, negotiating bin Laden to return back to his country of origin, in which Saudi officials, led by Prince Turki bin Faisal, who is the director of the Saudi Intelligence Directorate, the GID, and cautioned about having bin Laden returned back to Saudi Arabia with his Mujahideen fighters and Egyptian clerics. Now, according to the 9/11 Commission report, and I'm going to read the quote directly, quote, in February 1996, Sudanese officials began approaching officials from the United States and other governments, asking what actions of theirs might ease foreign pressure. In secret meetings with Saudi officials, Sudan offered to expel bin Laden to Saudi Arabia and asked the Saudis to pardon him. U.S. officials became aware of these secret discussions, certainly by March. Saudi officials apparently wanted bin Laden expelled from Sudan, that they had already revoked his citizenship, however, would not tolerate his presence even in Saudi Arabia. Also, bin Laden may have no longer felt safe in the Sudan, where he had already escaped at least one assassination attempt that he believed to have been the work of Egyptian or Saudi regimes paid for by the CIA, end quote. This quote from the 9/11 Commission report would turn out to be true. Now, the um, the CIA station chief, the CIA station in Khartoum, already had a huge, lengthy file on Bin Laden that went back as far as 1992. That's when he arrived in the Sudan. Donald Peterson, the American ambassador to Sudan, knew all too well that Bin Laden was conducting operations, terrorist operations, of running multiple training camps, along with Egyptian and Saudi members of the al-Masada camp, which later would turn out to be Al-Qaeda, led by a number of Egyptian military officers, former ones, Abu Ubaidah al-Banshari, Abdul Hadi al-Iraqi, and Abu Hafs al-Masri, who would later be renamed to Mohammed Atef, who would later go on to be the military committee leader of Al-Qaeda. Now, Peterson had sent diplomatic cables back to Richard Clarke at the National Security Council about information regarding Bin Laden and his growing group of Mujahideen fighters and Egyptians operating in Khartoum. There were a number of camps that were operating here under Bin Laden's tutorship, including Al Damazin Farms and Soba Farms. Bin Laden, by the way, also spent tens of millions of dollars in the infrastructure of this poor country, which was another reason why Omar al-Bashir welcomed Bin Laden with open arms, knowing full well who he was anyway. But he opened up a number of legitimate operations, legitimate businesses. Some of them were called Taba Investments, Al-Hijra Construction, Bin Laden International, and Al-Qudadat Transportation. He also built a runway for airport transportation, building farms, building roads. And meanwhile, he had people running under him that were running daily finances. And one of them was a Lebanese native and Afghanistan contact, Wadi al-Hajj. Wadi al-Hajj also had a home in Arlington, Texas, here in the United States, but he had a very questionable background, which led to a previous tie to the assassination of former Jewish defense leader Rabbi Meir Kahane, who was assassinated by El Sayed Nasser in Manhattan in 1990, in which a 1993 World Trade Center bombing suspect, Mahmoud Abalima, had once asked Wadi al-Hajj to purchase a 38 caliber revolver, and that was the same gun that was used by El Sayed Nasser to assassinate Meir Kahane, just shortly after al-Hajj had purchased the weapon, which were given to Mahmoud Abalima, which was given to El Sayed Nasser. Meanwhile, you had top CIA officials in Maryland who began constructing an idea to assassinate Bin Laden while he was beginning his routines in Khartoum. This is going to be what the 9/11 Commission reports I quoted to you was about. There was a legendary CIA operative named Billy Waugh who was in the Sudan. And the reason why he was in the Sudan was because there was a previous operation that he partook with Cofer Black, who at the time wasn't head of the counterterrorism unit. Billy Waugh, Cofer Black, had captured another nefarious terrorist, a European terrorist, Carlos the Jackal. Now, Billy Waugh was asked to conduct another operation in which he is to detail and collect as much information regarding this man, Osama bin Laden. It was said that Billy Waugh was at times so close to bin Laden that he could have killed him with a rock while he was going to pray at the mosque in Khartoum. This idea was pitched to the National Security Council at these presidential daily briefs, in which heads of the intelligence services at the Pentagon, as well as certain White House officials like the Secretary of Defense or maybe the Secretary of State, would partake in these meetings. And Bill Clinton denied these operations to the CIA to kill bin Laden then. Meanwhile, over at Alex Station, Alfred and Bukowski began hiring 12 other people. Some of these people you heard of, some of them you haven't, including Jennifer Matthews, Michelle Ann Casey, John Kiriakou, and others. They would be seen as a very close-knit group, mostly women. And they were very uncompromising to anyone else outside of Michael Scheuer. And they were so uncompromising and so devoutly loyal to Scheuer that Anthony Schaefer from the U.S. Army, who nicknamed them the Manson family, which was, the nickname came from members of the counterterrorism unit regarding the women of Scheuer. I got that mixed up. Sorry about that. Anthony Schaefer, nicknamed the Bin Laden issue station Alex Station, named after Michael Scheuer's son, Alec. That was the quote attributed to Schaefer. So excuse me. The room itself, the Bin Laden issue station, was a room called 2600, room 2600. And this was located in Langley headquarters. And it was cordoned off to anyone besides staff and CIA leadership officials. Michelle Ann Casey was tasked by Tom Wilshire to lead the biggest CIA operation of the last 25 years. And that was, she was the lead manager or the case officer of monitoring all human intelligence regarding an Al-Qaeda communications hub located in Sana'a, Yemen. Thanks to local investigators Ray Nowolski and John Duffy, who would go on to produce the most important 9/11 podcast ever heard, called Who is Rich Blee, in which he named Michelle Ann Casey and Richard Blee, who would replace Scheuer in 1999 as station chief at Alex Station, which was not known to the public at the time. Read The Watchdogs Didn't Bark by Ray Nowolski to find out more. The NSA at the same time was running a long-standing operation monitoring bin Laden's satellite phone that started as far back as 1992, in which this communications hub in Sana'a, Yemen kept calling, and the NSA had flagged this number and began monitoring the calls of the house as well. The CIA became involved and found out that the number of the Yemen hub was 967-1-200578. This number was only known to the CIA and the NSA at the time. The number was never shared to the FBI, to the Department of State. That the CIA and the NSA withheld this information. Meanwhile, you have Al-Qaeda conducting training camps in Afghanistan. Bin Laden was expelled from Sudan, goes back to Afghanistan in 1996. He's now a guest in the country of Afghanistan under Taliban leader Mohammed Mullah Omar, who had given him refuge, knowing that he could use bin Laden's finances to help the Taliban gain more control of the country, which they controlled south of Afghanistan. They were fighting against the Northern Alliance headed by Ahmad Shah Massoud and Rashid Datsun of the Southern Alliance. Bin Laden had agreed to his demands, Mullah Omar, and in short order, in 1996, bin Laden and Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the emir of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, organized an al-Qaeda committee called the World Islamic Front, which openly declared war on the United States, in which a fatwa was signed by Osama bin Laden, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Abu Yasir Rafai Ahmed Taha, and Sheikh Mir Hamza. In it, bin Laden declared that because of the United States' continued presence in Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia, as well as their continued support of Israel, along with its incessant war against the Arab world, especially in Iraq, where you had the first Gulf War, and its past instances of Gulf War atrocities through the oil for food program, which led to the deaths approximately of 500,000 men, women, and children, mostly elderly men and children. And in this declaration, the fatwa stated that Americans, only non-civilians, so that would mean military officials, are to be killed on sight. The fatwa was made aware to the State Department through George Tenet, who in turn devised a plan to kill bin Laden in 1997. By 1998, a second fatwa was declared on the United States by bin Laden. World Islamic Front Against the Crusaders and its Armies, in which it declared in this fatwa that not just military, but you are to kill civilians anywhere you find them. George Tenet then declared war on bin Laden in the following year. Michael Scheuer, whose group was so insular even to the agency at this time, was demoted to Langley Library by none other than the new DCI, George Tenet, who became quickly tired of the passive means to assassinate or capture bin Laden. Replacing Michael Scheuer at the bin Laden issue station was Richard Blee, whose father was a legendary case officer, David Blee, which is the reason why he was considered for the job. Cofer Black, who helped to capture Carlos the Jackal, was promptly named Chief of Counterterrorism. Together, Tenet, Blee, Black, and James Pavitt, the Directorate of Operations, would begin extrapolating on Tenet's new draft strategy called the Plan. Pretty vague title. U.S. President Bill Clinton disapproved of it, however, but according to the 9/11 Commission report, and I'll quote you from the report, quote, on May 20th, Director Tenet discussed the high risk of the operation with Sandy Berger and his deputies, warning that people might be killed, including bin Laden. Success was to be defined as the exfiltration of bin Laden out of Afghanistan. A meeting of principals was scheduled for May 29th to decide whether the operation should go ahead, but the principals did not meet. The The plan was never presented to the White House for a decision. Working level CIA officers were disappointed. No capture plan before 9/11 ever again attained the same level of detail and preparation. The tribals reported readiness to act diminished, and bin Laden's security precautions and defenses became more elaborate and formidable. End quote. Now, also during this time, and I'll be remiss if I don't remind you of this, is that bin Laden had a security detail, not just Al Qaeda, but the Taliban. Because what they didn't want was bin Laden to basically create another fatwa attracting attention of the US military to invade the country to get bin Laden or to capture him, because at the same time, the Taliban is fighting the Northern Alliance as well as the Southern Alliance because they want to control the country. And if the US military invaded, that would hinder those plans. So the Taliban ordered bin Laden not to conduct any more media interviews, and he didn't after that fatwa. And after Peter Bergen interviewed bin Laden, there was no more interviews until after the attacks of September 11, 2001. But because of this, and all without the knowledge of the Taliban, mind you, bin Laden wanted to ramp up attacks against the United States, but he also knew it would bring attention to the Taliban. And with the recent arrest of Omar Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh and the emir of the Gamma Islamiyah group, which was a Egyptian radical fundamentalist sect, for his participation in the failed Landmarks bombing plot in New York, which was an operation that was under the watchful eye of the FBI because they had an insider who was also an Egyptian military officer, or former one, Imad Salem, who was building bombs on their behalf in this warehouse in Jamaica, Queens, which was outfitted with listening devices and cameras of the FBI. In 1997, on November 17, 1997, members of the Gamma Islamiyah had conducted a brutal attack on Western and Japanese tourists at the Luxor in Egypt, in which I've done a podcast on called the Luxor Massacre. This was a particularly brutal massacre that involved the deaths of over 58 foreign tourists. Sheikh Rahman, from his prison cell, blamed the Israelis for the killings, and Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri maintained that the Egyptian police had committed it. However, the news went global, and the crackdowns began in Egypt under then President Hosni Mubarak of Islamic fundamentalists from Gamma Islamiyah and Egyptian Islamic Jihad. At the same time, you had Israeli intelligence that began traveling inside the United States to begin top secret operations involving Hamas, Hezbollah, as well as Al-Qaeda operatives without the approval or knowledge of anyone at the Department of Justice or the State Department. Now, these spy rings inside the country would go unnoticed until 1999. But even by then, these operations involving a drug ring, a large-scale art student ring that was located in the Northeast and Southwest of the country, and moving front companies in Florida, in New Jersey, New York. You also had Saudi operatives, and I mentioned this ad nauseum, so you know this already, that were operating in California, in Arizona, And like I said, I'll link you uh, information regarding all of this in the bottom of the description box after this is done. And what I'll link to is the office of the FBI Office of Inspector General report in June of 2006 entitled A Review of the FBI's Handling of Intelligence Information Relating to the September 11th Attacks. I'll also link you the Gerald Shea memo, which was a memo outlined regarding Israeli intelligence operation rings operating in the mid-1990s to 2001 and 2. So you can read at your leisure. I like to use primary source material regarding these live discussions because I don't want you to just believe what I say. I want you to come away with each video knowing something, not believing something. I don't care what you believe. I want to help educate you, help inform you, basically. I'm not your teacher. I'm a student myself. But I want to inform you because that's what these videos should be about. Videos should be about information sharing. So you could come away richer than what you previously were before you watched the video. Okay. Now, this operation hub in Yemen, in which the CIA began monitoring, as well as the NSA, but the CIA conducts human intelligence, saw an individual that was visiting the house. This individual later found out to be Khalid al-Mihdhar. And if that name sounds familiar, of course, because most of you know that I've used this name in just about every 3 videos I ever post, and because he's a very important individual, he's the connection to the CIA and the NSA and the terrorist attacks, as well as the Saudi link as well. He's that important. And the reason why he's visiting this house because he's married to the daughter of the owner of the house. The owner of the house is Ahmed al-Hada, an associate of Osama bin Laden from his days in Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion. His daughter is Hoda al-Hada, and Khalid al-Mihdhar had married her. Now, when the NSA got wind of a phone call involving a person by the name of Khalad, who would later turn out to be Tawfiq bin Attash, Walid bin Attash, who informed Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and his brother Salem al-Hazmi about a high-level meeting in Malaysia. The NSA informed the CIA to go and follow these individuals, because they don't do human intelligence, the NSA, and see what they got, and then report back to them and share the information with them. The CIA did. Followed them all the way to Malaysia, in which there was a number of individuals that were attending this meeting, including Yazid Sufat, an Indonesian businessman with links to a terrorist organization that had links to Al-Qaeda named Jemaah Islamiyah, who is a businessman, by the way, who rented the condominium, in which a number of high-level terrorist officials like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Tawfiq bin Attash, Fahad al-Kuso, Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and others that were involved with the USS Cole bombing, the Millennium Plot, and the 9/11 attacks. It is alleged that the CIA, through the Malaysian authorities, has videotape of those coming in and out of the house. But what we do know is that there was photographs taken, and those photographs of Tawfiq bin Attash, Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, were then forwarded to the Bin Laden issue station. During the next morning, one of the FBI agents that was tasked to work at the Bin Laden issue station, Doug Miller, had viewed the information regarding Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi photographs as well as photographs of their passports, which had U.S. visas in them. And this information showed that Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were coming to the United States January 15, 2000. Doug Miller ran over to his space station and started drafting up a draft report, or a CIR report, which is a Central Intelligence report, detailing or shadow copying the cable showing Khalid al-Mihdhar's and Nawaf al-Hazmi passports, as well as their arrival inside the United States. But they had to get approval because it's CIA information. So when Doug Miller was waiting for approval from Tom Wilshire, the deputy chief of Alex Station, Michelle Ann Casey, who read the cable, reported back to her superior, Tom Wilshire, and basically said, "What do you want to do?" The draft cable that was addressed to the FBI headquarters, which is not public, it's not classified, but the transcript is, and I'm going to read you part of it. And this is, you're privileged because not many people know this. It read, Mihdhar travel to Malaysia. Links between Yemen Hub and the U.S. Embassy bombings. Photos of the Malaysia meeting have been taken and sent to the FBI. That was false. Mihdhar has multiple entry visa into the U.S., plans to stay in New York City for 3 months. That's when his visa runs out. Okay. The cable was never sent. And that's because Tom Wilshire told Michelle Ann Casey to write on the cable, "Please hold off per Wilshire." The cable was now on hold. Mark Rossini, who I've interviewed, went back to Michelle Ann Casey and said, "Why isn't this cable being sent? These men are known Al-Qaeda operatives. They're involved with the USS Cole bombing. They're involved with Al-Qaeda. They served in the Al-Qaeda military committee in Chechnya. We have a direct link between a major terrorist organization and these two men. So there's no FISA warrant involved. If we had to look through their warnings, there would be a FISA warrant. But this is an FBI matter." Michelle Ann Casey tells him, and I'll read you the quote, "Listen, it's not an FBI case. It's not an FBI matter. When we want the FBI to know, we'll let them know. And you're not going to say anything," end quote. Now, this Malaysia meeting, in which most of you know, lasted 3 days, January 5th to January 8th. And on January 15th, 2000, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi land at Los Angeles International Airport with the full knowledge of the CIA, with the full knowledge of the NSA. But the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Department of State, White House officials had no idea that these two men, with strong ties to Al-Qaeda, strong ties to terrorist operations, had entered the United States. So that means the CIA intentionally withheld information from the FBI. Now, just months later, many months later, the CIA's analyst at the Counterterrorism Center, Clark Shannon, would go to a meeting with FBI officials in Washington, D.C. In his hand are pictures of Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and he shows them to FBI agent Steve Bungard. And next to him is Dina Corsi, legal counsel of the FBI. He goes and tells them, "Do you know anybody in these photos?" No. Now, just 2 months prior, a month prior to that, the CIA sent one of the FBI agents working at the Alex station, a woman named Margaret Gillespie, with those same pictures. And she went back to the FBI and said, "Do you know anybody in these pictures?" And Steve Bongard was there, and he said, "No, who are they?" And she goes, "I don't know," because the CIA didn't tell her. Now, what that did was the FBI now distrusts their own FBI agent who's working at the CIA analyst station because she really didn't know. The CIA didn't tell her. But they told her, "How do you not know? You're working there, you're there. How do you not know?" So that caused a level of mistrust. Wouldn't you agree that this was intentional? So the very next month, I'm sorry, 2 months later, Clark Shannon goes and meets with Steve Bungard. This time, he shows them. "Who are these guys?" Steve Bungard says. "Who are these? And why are you following them?" And Clark Shannon tells him, "I can't tell you that." Meanwhile, there's a big argument. Later on, during the Joint House inquiry, which is a congressional inquiry headed by co-chairs Bob Graham and Porter Goss, where they questioned the DCI Tenet. Carl Levin asks George Tenet that Clark Shannon had already given closed-door testimony, and it was closed-door because he was relating classified information that's not for the public, and said that he was given orders from Tenet not to share this information to the FBI. So when Carl Levin told George Tenet, "Did you tell this analyst," he didn't name his name because he was being hidden behind a partition, right? I mean, not behind a partition. It was closed door testimony. He basically says, "Did he tell you something different?" And George Tenet said, "Yes, he told me something different." And George Tenet and Carl Levin says, "Well, he told you, and he told us something different." And Tenet was basically flabbergasted. What could he say? That's basically what happened. And Clark Shannon would be telling the truth. Tenet intentionally withheld this information from the FBI, from the White House for 16 months. They finally tell them in a principals meeting in August 23rd, 2001. But by then, it's much too late. The FBI is trying to rush to find Khalid al-Mihdhar. Nawaf al-Hazmi is trying finding a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, what the CIA still didn't tell them was that they had dual U.S. visas. Why is that? Why were they not put on a terrorist watch list? Why was Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, not put on a terrorist watch list, which is called the tip-off database? Because if that was the case, Khalid al-Mihdhar, who left the country to visit his pregnant wife in the year 2001, would have never been able to come back. But when he returned to the United States just a few short weeks later, they were both put on the terrorist watch list. Convenient? James Bamford, who wrote the book The Spy Factory and a couple of other books, and he's a fantastic author, by the way. I recommend every single one of his books. He would write in The Spy Factory the following quote, "Many of the eavesdropping technologies in use around the world and developed in Israel were originally military technologies and were developed and improved by Unit 8200 veterans, which is a very specific and covert signals intelligence group located in Israel. A former commander of Unit 8200, cited by Bamford, states that Burrent technology was directly influenced by 8200 technology, Verent's parent company, Converse. Main product, the logger, is based on the unit's technology. Virtually the entire American telecommunication system is bugged by Israeli-formed companies with possible ties to Israel's eavesdropping agency. Because during this time, there was another Israeli intelligence ring monitoring the intelligence services, which was linked to the art student ring. Now, not to get this confused with the fringe conspiracy movement of the 9/11 Truth Movement, in which they say the art student ring were the ones planting bombs and that their pictures are taken in the book Gelatin B. Can you imagine? You're wiring a building for the biggest demolition on the face of the earth and the biggest operation on the face of the earth, and you're going to have your picture taken? This is what the fringe movement and the truth movement believe, that there was these group of art students inside the World Trade Center. Yeah, they were art students. They weren't even Israeli. They were Austrian. And it wasn't just 6 people. The real art student ring was over 250 to 300 people. And people like Rebecca Roth, Christopher Bolin, they tell you, no, the art student ring is in the World Trade Center planting bombs where their picture is taken. But they don't talk to you about the art student ring. Why? Why is that? Is that they want to intentionally disinform you? Probably. But for what reason? I don't know what to tell you. Now, to report on this, miraculously, of all TV stations, Fox News, led by Carl Cameron, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, would state that the Israeli intelligence spy operations and the use of remote technology, in which he was going to do a 10-part series. I think they got up to 3 parts and then it was cut off. We can't have that. And for over 12 months, this art student ring operated under the guise of selling cheap art, in which many of these were Israeli spies. They were young men and women, and they would go to the homes of officials from the FBI, the DEA, and the State Department. Now, the district attorney, the former district attorney of San Luis Obispo County, Gerald Shea, would open his own investigation and report on these Israeli cells who are operating in this country without impunity. The name of this report is entitled The Shea Memorandum. Now, that report is linked in my description in the Israeli live discussion ring. I'll link it in the description under this description as well. So you have a number of intelligence apparatuses from the NSA, the Saudis, the Israelis, and most notably the CIA, who have been conducting the longest and oldest operation on Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, far longer than any agency in the world, going all the way back to the late 1980s. And most of this information is classified. Most of this information was never shared with anybody outside the agency. So we don't know what the CIA has or doesn't have. But we do have some information. It's public. And this information basically came out in the 9/11 Commission report and most notably the Joint House Inquiry. Now, again, the fringe movement in the 9/11 movement, the truth movement, don't want you to read the Joint House Inquiry, don't want you to read the 9/11 Commission report because they represent the official narrative. And the official narrative is all false, all of it's false. Well, how can you make something false if you've never read it? Not everything in the 9/11 Commission report is false. Not everything in it is true. Most important is what wasn't in the 9/11 Commission report. Well, what I just elucidated to you tonight is not in the report. And there are many other things that I could talk about, that I have talked about in previous live discussions, that are also not in the report. And if you want to take a look at my past live videos, you can, and I would suggest you do so. The CIA had a number of times under Scheuer of Alex Station where they could have assassinated bin Laden, and it was rejected by the Clinton administration. And then when Bush came into office, Richard Blee became new Alex Station chief, and there was no more assassination attempts until after the events of September 11, 2001, in which an operation called Jawbreaker, in which I did a live video discussion regarding the capture or killing of Osama bin Laden. Go watch that for more information on that. So, what can we take away from tonight's discussion? We could take away knowing that the CIA amassed an enormous amounts of data that goes back to 1988, but we do know since 1992 at least. That's when bin Laden entered the Sudan. We know that at least. This is from the historical record, documented reports. We know this. Okay, so let's just take it from 92. So from 1992 to 2001, right before the September 11th attacks, 10 years of information. That's an enormous amount of information. That's just the CIA. What about the NSA? The wiretaps of bin Laden's satellite phone, the house in Yemen from 1996 to 2001, 5 years of metadata, enormous amounts of data. And now I'm mentioning the Israelis, the art student ring, the moving front companies, the technological, the drug enforcement, the drug ring, the invasive technological ring that was reported by James Bamford in the Spy Factory, as well as the Gerald Shea memo, but ignored by the legacy media. Well, we know why. The Saudis out west monitoring Khalid al-Mihdhar and Wafa Hazmi as soon as they got off the plane on January 15th, 2000. All this information is not in the 9/11 Commission report. All this information is ignored by the public because of the disinformation that comes from the fringe aspect of the truth movement, mainly the geopolitics, and which is the reason why you see me so aggressive toward them. Because what I'm imparting to you tonight should have been known back in 2002. And if this was known and promoted, we would have had a more educated public, and maybe, just maybe, we could have held somebody accountable. But look at the truth movement now. It's in shambles. It's in disarray. They're still promoting these fantastical theories, and they're not giving you information that certain people like myself, Ryan Dawson, DJ Thermal Detonator, Robbie Martin, Abby Martin, Ray Nowolski, John Duffy, John Gold, Darren Harvey, Sean Russell, Ed Brotherton, that we're trying to share and impart with you. This information has always existed. It just wasn't known to the public because it was ignored by the legacy media and misconstrued by the fringe theorists in the 9/11 truth movement. And it's unfortunate. And we have names to blame in the CIA. I mean, there was an intentional withholding of information from the director, George Tenet, from the head of the counterterrorism unit, Cofer Black, from the deputy chief of Alex Station, Tom Wilshire, Michelle Ann Casey, the head of the operations at the Yemen Hub, Alfreda Ann Bukowski, so many others. And meanwhile, we have FBI whistleblowers like Mark Rossini who are telling you, hey, yes, this information was out there, but it was ignored and never shared with the public or the State Department altogether. And there was a coordinated effort to keep this information out of the hands of people who could have probably interfered with these people that would later turn out to be the hijackers on the plains of September 11, 2001. The question is why? Why was this information withheld? And I'll take some questions if you have them in the chat. You have 8 people here, 9 people. I'll take some questions if you have them. We'll be more than happy to. So the CIA basically was running a over 18-year program on Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda, and the information is not public; it's classified. In the same way that the NSA wiretapping of the house in Yemen and bin Laden's satellite phone, that too is classified. And I forgot the name of the executive order that Thomas Drake told me about, but I'm trying to come up with an idea to file of a Freedom of Information request that overrides that executive order. And by the way, that's wishful thinking. It's a pipe dream. We'll probably never know until it's declassified. But if anybody's here and has a question, I will entertain questions. If not, I can end the stream. I'll give you a couple of seconds. It may seem that a lot of this information is ad nauseum, but I'm trying to drum this information into you because this is information that we can act on. I mean, we can act on information. We can't act on belief. There was so much information, I've forgotten all the questions I had. I'm sorry about that, Fire Pixie. I have to apologize. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I have long videos, and there's a lot of information I can impart, and what I don't want is to overwhelm you, but I do want you to know as much as possible. That's what I do want to. That's what I try to do in all my videos. Well, thank you. But yeah, no, I don't like. I know long videos. Not many people like long videos and stuff, so I'm trying to keep that in mind. So. And meanwhile, I just did a long video regarding a breakdown video. It was an hour and a half. I don't learn my lesson. But I'm sorry, but, there's so much disinformation out there. And, there's very few reputable people imparting information that you could use. And I'm just, trying to do a part. And, I have a very small audience, and that's fine. I'm not expecting many people to follow me. And, like I say, in all my videos, I don't want you to follow me. And I want you to learn, and I want you to create your own venues, because that's how you build a movement. Can't build a movement on followers and sheep. We need a lot of leaders. And that's how you build a movement. How you build small pockets of resistance. And we're resisting the federal government and agencies thereof affiliated with it. And, people have told me, you're fighting a losing battle. Yeah, I know that. But I got to believe, this would be, because I'm a pessimist, right? But I got to be optimistic. Or else what is all this for, right? I got to be optimistic that in the future, that maybe you people in this room will become that person who reaches a far bigger audience than I ever could using the information. And it's not my information. You remember that too. The information I'm sharing with you is public information. It's not my information. It's everyone's. Everyone. You don't forget that. It's everyone's information. It's just not known to many people. And that's what the powers that be wanted. These fringe people in the truth movement, they're doing the work on behalf of the government. Government doesn't have to do anything. How ironic is that? Meanwhile, they think that they're going against the agents of the state by sharing this disinformation, because to them, it's not disinformation, but it is belief. And like I said before, I don't want you coming away with any video I make believing something. I want you to know something. And if you learn something that you didn't learn before, that's my reward. That's my Patreon money. I don't have a Patreon account. I never will. What I do, I enjoy doing. And I think it's a duty to inform people, to educate people. Because in turn, you're going to do the same for somebody else, whether it's on viral media or in real life. But you will do the same for others. And we got some good voices out there. And they're mostly in the libertarian movement. People like Reed Coverdale, the Jackman brothers, Mike and Eric. Ryan Dawson's still out there, even though he's banned from the world. DJ Thermal Detonator, he's not banned yet. We still got some voices out there. In the libertarian movement, a lot of them, they're speaking up against war, against international conflict, against the Federal Reserve and foreign lobby institutes of the Gulf and Israel, speaking on behalf of the minority factions all around the world, those oppressed. So we should support those channels. We should support those people. And, there's people say, hey, open up a Patreon and we'll give you money. Thank you very much. That's a kind remark. I want to do what I want to do. And for me, when I first started viral media, I promised myself I would never make a dime. And because I'm not creating anything new, right? I'm not making films. I'm just reporting on information that's already public. And that would seem disingenuous, for me anyway, to impart information that's already out there. It's just not being reported. And I could do that for free and very easy. And that's why I'd rather use audio interviews and audio videos, because I don't like doing video because you have to stop wherever you are and watch. This way, when you drive, and you could be anywhere in the country, you're listening. So that means I could reach a bigger audience that way and reach you in various different situations, easily accessible. So I will end the stream on that tonight. And listen, thank you very much. 10 people were watching, and to me, that's like 1,000. And like I said, with every video, I want you to become informed, to come away with something, and that's my reward. That's my reward for you. And it gives me pleasure to do these videos. It really does. And I'm very happy to provide content for you. And like I said, what I want in the end is for all of you, not some of you, all of you. And for those who aren't watching and may watch later, I want you to come away knowing something, learning something, because I gotta hope that one of you out there is sometime in the future going to make their own channel and give that spark that's needed and reach a far bigger audience than I ever could. And with that, we could start a real movement, make real change, and demand from those who are supposed to work for us, the federal government, to act on our behalf and not for their own agendas. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I wish you a good evening. Happy 4th of July weekend to all of you. And after the holidays, I will return to do another live stream. I just don't know when. Usually I do these at the last second. Thank you very much for coming tonight.